Hello and welcome to this session, which is a collaboration between me and the wonderful Marcia Macaro and Carol Cooper. I've done one previous session to this, and we had a conversation in the last week or so about romantic love and romantic relationships, and that led into a conversation about, what lessons can be learned from that part of life for organizations and businesses and so forth. So we thought, let's do a little session, shall we, for this wonderful network and see what lessons can be drawn. My background, as it says on your screen here, is in people development. I want to just obviously welcome you here today and just make sure you're aware that Marcia and Carol will be pitching in and pausing me and challenging me on some of this material and just exploring some of the questions, really. We've been having these conversations at no cost to one another at all, just to sort of give out something in these very difficult times because, folks are really up against it. I know people I work with are, facing all kinds of strange and unusual difficulties. So in terms of background, my background is in what we call organizational psychology, but I had to remind myself that I've actually got I think it's about 4 different certifications in relation to what we might call couples coaching and even training for couples and how to be a happy, more productive couple. So I'm not just, making this stuff up. I do know the literature and the research in this area in order to make these kinds of parallels. So I just want to reassure you of that. So let's dive in, shall we? So romance research. How on earth can research into romance, psychological research, be helpful to us? As you're going to see, I think today in this little bit of material I've prepared, I think you're going to find some powerful parallels between romance research and business and organizational applications. It mentioned in the title, let's just go back to that for a second, lessons from love, but how romance research can help us to foster secure workplace relationships. And that all sounds very nice, doesn't it? We want secure workplace relationships. Okay, a lot easier said than done. We've all had insecure relationships and difficult relationships that go in the workplace, much less outside of work. And so, there really are some pretty powerful parallels. Anything you guys want to pitch in, even so far?
No, I'm happy with that so far.
I'm happy with that so far, Nigel. Yeah.
All good. So let's look at why committed relationships sometimes, or some would say often, fail. There are many reasons. Now, let's just put this in context, okay? We're going to be just making some parallels between romantic relationships and business relationships. But, let's remind ourselves, divorce rates, sadly, in some ways, have gone up and up. Now, I'm out here in America, but I do know in the UK it's a similar trend. It's the Western world to some degree. Divorce rates have gone up and up. And you may or may not know that the divorce rates for people who get remarried, for example, are even worse. Second marriages, for example, or committed relationships of any kind, tend not to work out at an even higher rate. Now, good, bad, or ugly, it is what it is, okay? What we want to do today is to draw some parallels, some powerful parallels between, why is that sometimes occurring, and frankly, what can we do about it? And what can we do about fostering? Yeah, what can we do about fostering some, better quality, more secure working relationships based on some of these sorts of insights? So the first one probably won't shock you, but we don't always think of it, okay? So we're going to look, these are just the themes, and then we're going to dive into the themes. Recruiting the most appropriate candidates has never been easy. If you're going to try and recruit a good candidate for marriage or committed relationship of any kind, good luck. Because it's a bigger mess out there than it ever was, despite all of the online dating and all the rest of it. But there is hope. Some people are managing to find successful and happy relationships despite that, but it's never been easy because, of course, people are wonderful and people are confusing, and we're all very complicated creatures, even though in some ways very simple creatures. So I've put here, we tend to have, we humans, a faulty picker. We don't quite know how to pick them, and they don't know how to pick us. And so the point is, this is a bit of a recipe for trouble and for pain. If there's a poor match that's gone on, then, the danger is that we are just setting ourselves up for failure right from the very beginning in our business choices of who we work with and who we partner with, really, because that's what we're doing. So we're going to explore that. We'll get into that in a few moments. There's also an issue to do from the couples research of poor alignment. People say, opposites attract. Okay, well, sometimes opposites attract and it works. Okay, but quite honestly, that's not always a good thing because people who are somewhat potentially too opposite, it can be a recipe for friction. So again, there's no easy answers or rules, but as it says here, a couple, for example, or a couple in partnership or in the workplace, who have a bit of a sense of the same kind of vision mission, goals, and values, when those things are aligned, things are bound to just be a bit easier, because we're not basically pulling in different directions. You know, like if I were to work, you know, with you, Marcia, you know, in some kind of direct way opposed to this sort of distant and indirect way, you know, we'd have to sort of make sure, you know, that we won't aim in the same kind of direction, and that we've got, you know, similar things in common, and that, you know, we're not going to be pulling in different directions or at odds with each other. And that sounds like common sense, but it's very easy to miss that kind of thing. And then we're going to quickly look at 4 known serial killers of committed relationships. Okay, there are certain things that have come through in the research absolutely radiantly clear. And most couples and most people have never really heard of these things. So we're going to look at those, and then we're going to get a bit more optimistic and look at the antidotes. How can I help to cleanse my working and other relationships of these lethal killers? And then at the end, we're going to look at quite a difficult issue, which is what I call necessary endings. And you know, the courage to sometimes sadly have to say farewell. But it's not always sad, because sometimes when we need to say goodbye to relationships that aren't really working, that may actually be for the best. So that's our agenda.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm interested to see how this ends up really, and what the information is. So.
So good. So let's just spend a few moments just really sort of setting the stage. You know, why does this subject matter? And what's the aim really of looking at this subject? Okay, so what is the pain and the impact of difficult relationships versus good ones? So I've mentioned this term, you know, securely or insecurely attached relationships. Okay, when we are securely attached to other people, you know, we're at peace. We feel secure, we feel confident. There's a whole lot less trouble than when we feel insecure. And this applies to the workplace very much, you know, too. If I'm attached to my boss and the organization I work with, we're going to continue to do good work and good business together in our working relationship. And if I'm not, well, there's probably problems ahead. So what do I mean by this? Let's just sort of give a bit of an articulation here. A secure or securely attached relationship means that we have some kind of a shared vision, values, and goals, and there's sufficient crossover at least. So for example, that couple I was telling you about, you know, where they're very different. I think I alluded to that couple earlier. They do nonetheless, despite being very different types of people, have a sense of where they wish their life together to go. They have some shared goals, a lot of shared values, and they're managing to create a pretty amazing life together, but you wouldn't have necessarily predicted it. Okay, so they're, you know, they're good and secure for that reason. And it's got to be safe enough to speak up, to stay constructive, to be fair to each other, to have a sort of what we call win-win relationship. You know, you're happy, I'm happy, whether it's work or whether it's in our intimate private life. People need to be fairly reasonable, not too dependent or independent of each other, but what we call interdependent. So that means, you know, we're better together than we would have been on our own, and it's a really good, empowering, positive mutual relationship. Whereas insecure is obviously all the opposites. You know, there's an unarticulated or an obvious lack of shared vision and values and goals. So for example, I heard about a couple once, and after 10 or 12 years together, very happily, they discovered that one of them really wanted to have kids, and the other one really did not want to have kids. And that was their undoing, because there wasn't actually a shared sense of, you know, purpose and vision and values and things. If we're insecure, we don't really feel confident, we don't trust, or whatever it is, we will have what we call anxious or avoidant tendencies. So we'll avoid speaking up. The relationship will be rocky and unstable. There'll probably be some drama sooner or later, and things will be sort of not so constructive, and there'll be some resistance and some pushback, and it just won't actually be that productive a relationship. So the point I want to make here really is simply that, you know, a failure to work sufficiently collaboratively and productively is bound to be the case if we're not securely in good relationship, be it at work or outside of work. And that can lead, as it says there, to possible harm for the organization or for all the people involved. Now, obviously, outside of work, you know, people often have kids together. It's one of the good reasons for being together, one of the nice things to be together for, and that is obviously all the more significant. And as you know, in your world, you know, sometimes we enter into business partnerships, enter into contracts, and very serious implications can be the case. If there's trouble, it can really be trouble. Yeah. And that can cause a great deal of stress, a great deal of upset, loss of money, and all sorts of different things can occur. So just to put this in a diagram, I like a good diagram. You know, there's a guy who once said, you know, hiring weak people begets weak results. Now, some people think that sounds harsh, okay? But we're not talking, are we, about the people as people? We're talking about the people and the specific role that we are getting involved with them for. Okay, so you can have wonderful good people who are just a bad fit for that role.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
totally
it's not,
agree with that. Yeah.
absolutely, it's not personal. It's really about whether this is a good fit for the role. And so, it's important to remember. So, insecure situations between, folks tend to not be very happy. Secure ones tend to be the ideal. We can talk together, we can work things out, we can get along together and be productive. We can't be too idealistic. So what I want to suggest is that we need to feel and be secure enough in our working relationships to be productive and to stay on track. Not too idealistic, but, secure enough is really the goal. So let's think then about, recruiting and finding the right people to either marry or get an intimate personal relationship with or to work with. Okay, let's talk about the good people. Okay, what's going on when it's going well? Well, two things usually we tend to say are the case. There's good character, meaning that their character is such that we can get along with them. We trust them, we feel secure around them, we don't feel like we're going to be, given a very, very hard time or be attacked awfully and severely or anything like that. So they're persistently enough showing some good traits with not too much negative or too much difficulty, but also not just that they're good people and honorable people and trustable people, but that they're competent. Like my dear mother, okay, much as I might love her dearly and she might be of good character, I wouldn't trust her to drive a car, because she doesn't have a driving license and she lacks the competence. I wouldn't trust her to cut my arm open and remove a problem or deal with a problem because she has no medical training. So the point is that the two things really need to be the case. And some people have the skills, but they don't have the integrity. And that can be, a problem too. And I would just add to that, straightforwardness. When someone's a pleasure to work with and they're straightforward to work with and it's all good, you just kind of know it. So this is really what we're sort of aiming for when we talk about, finding the right kinds of folks to either marry or get involved with or to employ, is that these are the sorts of things that we're ultimately aiming for. So that's what it's like when it's good. Okay. Now beyond good, when there are truly great partnerships, there's a little quote from that guy again. One superstar can be of more value than 5 mediocre performances. Now, have you guys found that to be the case?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes,
absolutely.
Over the years, yeah.
In other words, some folks are so good, so valuable, such an asset, such a giver that they really do sort of stand in a league of their own. And they're such an asset, you almost want to pay them double. Because frankly, they do more or they're of more value than maybe two.
They go the extra mile, don't they? Always, yeah.
Go the extra mile and so forth. So that's just worth sort of keeping in mind when we think about, creating and fostering good partnerships to begin with. I know there's a gentleman that I work with here, and honestly, he was such a catch. We were so lucky to get him, and we've been just endlessly grateful ever after, because he really is a superstar. So it's worth just remembering, superstars are out there, be it in personal relationships or in working relationships. A little interlude here, it's a known fact in the psychology of groups and organizations that there may be always the presence of potential, what they call freeloaders. What does that mean? There's a little definition here. It says, this is a picture here. I suppose I'm alluding to somebody who just wants to sort of stay in bed and finds it difficult to bother to find the energy to come to work and do much. It's a person who takes advantage of others' generosity without really giving anything in return. Now, I know out here in our nonprofit environment, we do see this. People who say, basically, I'm here, aren't I? What's your problem? Why do you have to keep taking issue with my work and my lateness and my attendance? And it's like they should just get paid for showing up.
Sitting at their desk.
Believe me, that's actually a growing trend. So let's not forget that. So, all right, so we talked about the good, okay, and we talked about the freeloaders. Well, what's it like when it's bad? Well, let's just give you a few examples. This is a huge topic, by the way, recruitment. I mean, that's a whole session in itself. But what is bad behavior in the workplace? We've all seen Gordon Ramsay. Love him dearly, but his conduct's pretty extreme, and he often upsets a lot of people. Now that takes many forms. I've met people like this lady that's appeared at the bottom of the screen here. Some meek people can actually be quite remarkably shocking in their behavior. And so don't underestimate that the meekest of people, or the seemingly meekest of people, can actually be quite remarkably badly behaved, and it can be quite shocking. Now this funny little thing here, they told the customer what? People who lack judgment, people who lack appropriateness, people who are not customer friendly can do a shocking amount of damage all by themselves. So that's the good, what it's like when it's good. This is a little bit of the bad, okay? What's it like when it's ugly? positively ugly in relationships. Okay, now marital relationships, you might see some of these dynamics. It could be men towards women, it could be women towards men. But, ugly behavior is, domineering, maybe manipulative. Some people, in other words, are, it says there, this is a quote I got from a gentleman once. He said, dealing with my partner is far more hassle than dealing with the issues at hand. In other words, some people really are troublesome. I've surveyed managers, certainly in our organization, and they'll tell you, managers who manage, a team, especially a significant team, that the time and the energy wasted on people that are, troublesome can be as much as 80% of their week.
Yeah.
I agree with that totally. Yeah.
Yes, eating up your time and energy. I know one of my bosses said once, when I'm not dealing with the troublesome few, I am worrying and losing sleep about the troublesome few. What are they getting up to before I've had a chance to get to them?
Okay.
Now, one very powerful guy that I've come across says, we need to understand the stress that some of this causes, these difficult relationships. He says, these people are literally making you ill to some degree. I was listening to something yesterday and they were saying that, stress can affect literally your body, your gut, your ability to remain healthy. Your whole body is affected. So I think we need to sort of bear that in mind. So some examples of, ugly folks in working relationships could be the dominators, the bullies and the power hungry. I came across an individual, even here in the nonprofit sector once, who was described as, building their kingdom, not our kingdom. And when I looked at their behavior, I was like, absolutely, they're here for their own self-interest. And it was fairly obvious. The micromanagers, stop doing this, stop doing that. I may as well do it myself. That kind of overbearingness that just grinds people down. The drama kings and queens, the selfish, the lazy, the late, the endless trouble and strife people. Oh my goodness, it's always so much difficulty with this person. I just can't seem to get anything done because of the drama. The passive aggressives. I remember studying a couple of years back, what is passive aggression? And it was the people who go, oh, okay, and they sort of smile at you, but they don't really mean it. And they say all these icky things, and they do all these icky things, and they're just an endless, drowning, toxic presence. And then those are the win-lose attitude. I'm going to get what I want, and I don't really care if that doesn't suit you. And that kind of stuff. And that leads us into, I've got a little picture of a snake here, the people who are literally manipulative and cause all kinds of mayhem. I heard a story recently where we had a daycare facility many, many miles from here, and they had one or two of these people in the building, and they were causing mayhem, stress for the staff, damage to the program, and literally reporting them to the authorities for no good reason. The authorities were getting upset. Why are you reporting things? There's nothing wrong here. Causing mayhem. And they were perfectly willing and capable of doing that. So these are the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to recruitment.
Yeah, it links in, doesn't it, with what you were saying about the recruitment process and why that is so important to get right. And when you're looking at this, almost like 20/80 rule, where 20% of the people are taking up 80% of your time, it's that lack of cost effectiveness.
Yes.
That when you rush the recruitment process and get somebody in place that just on the face of it sounds good, or you look at the CV and think, oh, what they've written on paper is good, without doing any real testing of whether they are actually competent to do the role.
Definitely. So that leads into the next issue very directly, okay, which is that looks and demeanor can be deceptive. So what they'll tell you in the psychological literature is that we humans are frankly biased. We're just built this way, okay? We tend to be more drawn towards people we find aesthetically appealing. Okay, a little example here of a famous, movie star, and that's just a fact. If you're presented with 5 or 10 different applicants, you'll tend to be drawn to the more externally or superficially more attractive, and that can also be demeanor. They seem so nice. I remember talking to somebody about a staff member who'd been a lot of trouble in the end. And they said, yes, but they seemed so nice in the interview. And I said, were they so nice? Because you see, some people are almost too nice to be true. And that's actually
people are very good at the interview process.
That's right.
They can get through that with, for whatever job, with the constant, Carol, with your HR background, you've probably seen this
unfortunately, I've seen it quite a lot, and at very senior levels, which is very damaging. I mean, it's all damaging, don't get me wrong, it's all damaging, but at very senior levels, and in my own role, outside of HR, you know, when I did DPI role, yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen it a lot, and it's unsettling, and you feel like you could kick yourself for being part of employing them, you know, but they were nice on the day.
And so let's make the parallel. Let's just go back to the parallel that we're having here of romantic relationships, okay? I've seen and heard of situations where people were all very nice until, believe it or not, sometimes even the wedding day, when suddenly the real them came out because they got them and they had them in the palm of their hand, and then suddenly things changed. Now, that's not always the case, but you get the idea. You know, who are we really dealing with when we get involved in these kinds of partnerships of any kind, be they business or other? So this adds to a tendency that a lot of us have, which is just to sort of assume the best of people. Do you mean I will assume you're as good and nice and kind a person as me until I start to have concerns, and by the time I have concerns, it's usually too late.
Right.
We're already stuck together, and I've got you on a contract, and oh my goodness, you know, how do I extricate myself? So it's never been easy. So if it looks good and it seems good to me, then the assumption is, as it says here, you know, that the person is good as a person because they seem good, at least initially, and that they will be good at the job because they talk a good game or they seem like they're going to be good. And frankly, it's delusional. There's something called the halo effect, which is where we pretty much, you know, put a halo over someone's head, either because they look nice, seem nice, did something that we admire, and then we just generalize and we say, well, they must be good because they seem impressive. And it's just simply not the case. We've got to be, as you said just now, I think, Carol, a bit more due diligence, really, when it comes to these kinds of things. Now this, do you remember Devil's Advocate?
Yeah.
That film from many years ago? This lady seemed very nice, but she actually, as you can see, wasn't that nice. So you get the idea. So what are we trying to say? That, you know, we've got to be careful. You know, when it comes to hiring and in love relationships. There's another factor, of course, too, you know, which is that in relationships, the one constant in all of our failed relationships is us. And so sometimes we need to take a look in the mirror and work out, okay, is it me?
Yeah.
You know, and get some reassurance through feedback that, you know, it may not be us that's actually the problem, and get some good measures on that. So let's keep going. So let's just sort of wrap up this business of, you know, choosing the right people in romantic and in business relationships, because it's never been easy. But there's a little quote here: mediocre people are easy to hire and difficult to fire. Again, this is not evaluating human beings as a whole. This is simply saying, you know, when it comes to this role, when it comes to this work and the work that we're involved with this person with, whether it's the work of a marriage or a committed relationship or a working relationship, you know, it's easy to get involved with folks. It can be much harder to extricate ourselves if it's really not going to go where we need it to go. So a few, you know, suggestions, you know, get some decent references. I know that can be hard, you know, but references can potentially yield some good, you know, support as to whether this person is trustworthy. Other sorts of red flags and things, you know, ask some clever questions. You know, sometimes in interviews, I'll say to people, you know, what is stress for you at work? Now, some people's stress is other people's walk in the park. Some people are stressed because, you know, somebody didn't get back to them. You know, what is going to be a source of stress, and to just anticipate that. That can be helpful. You know, and pre-hire, you know, make it very clear, what is this job that we're employing you to do? What is the work going to be? And really see, is it a good match? I sometimes say to people, you know, you're actually interviewing us too. Make sure this is the right place for you. Otherwise, that's not good for you, and it's definitely not good for us. So, you know, this is a two-way interview. And there's a thing today called a job preview, where you get the person to actually sit and maybe spend a bit of time more or less shadowing the job to see if it's actually for them. Because looking at a job on paper is not experiencing that job. And to encourage people not to put on any facades and actually work out, is this a role I want to take on? Because that may not be the case. And be challenging, you know, is this a place for you? And of course, you know, certainly over here, we have the first 90 days or however many days you get as the sort of, you know, the settling in period, whether it's 30 days or more. Really let them know, we will be checking if this is a good fit for us, and you'll need to check if this is a good fit for you. So don't get caught into commitments that you don't think are necessarily for you. Well, good. I think we're doing well in terms of covering our ground. Any comments at this point?
Well, I'd just like to say that I've always been a very strong believer, and I've always been involved in that sort of first 90 days situation where you, although it's all been very nice on the day, you know, it does prove a different point, and certainly shadowing people to see if the job's right for you. And you're right, you know, you're interviewing each other really. So yeah, that 90 days, I'm a great advocate of that. I just
the other thing is being able to give other people the opportunity to make comment on the candidate. So for some of the interviews that I've been involved in, we've given the score sheet to the receptionist and maybe somebody that's volunteering, just to see how the candidate reacts to them, and then comes into us. So they might be rude to the volunteer, rude to the receptionist, bullshit, and you know, who do you think you are? I've come, you know, do you know who I am? I've come for this position. And then when they get into the interview with us, they're as nice as pie. Well, when you've got their score sheet from reception and other people, because it is about, when you go back to what you said earlier about the values of the organisation and making sure that things marry up. Well, that's part of it, isn't it? That you want everybody within the company to be treated the same, not because the chief exec is coming down, that they are being really nice. They should be treating everybody respectfully within the organisation. And that's one way to get around it.
Definitely. So the purpose of spending a little bit of time on this has been really to try to get across the message between us here, and for those folks engaging with this material, you know, prevention is better than cure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Always. But it's hard to realize, you know, who you hire is who you're going to get. And you really are going to get them. And so if there's any real issues going on beneath the surface there, you know, it's a risk, but we've got to try to work on prevention. Because, you know, hire the right person, it's easy. You almost don't have to manage them. But if you don't happen to pick the right and enter into the wrong relationship, it really can be very, very difficult to either rescue, redeem, coach, or improve things. So let's go to another facet of that, okay, that links to some degree. Now, this can also be the explaining of why there may be tensions or difficulties. So vision and values, if they're well matched and aligned, people stay and people get along and people do better. And if they're not, trouble is probably ahead. Okay. So, you know, people say things, don't they? You know, we just get along really well. They're so easy to work with, or they're such a pleasure to work with. Okay, well, there's certain things going on beneath the surface in a marriage, in a committed relationship, or in a working relationship. You know, presumably they're reasonably reliable or reliable enough for the relationship, capable, responsive, warm. There's a mutual, reciprocal, fulfilling, satisfying, flexible, responsible. You know, whatever dynamics you're looking for, they must be there sufficiently for it to be a good, you know, mutually beneficial relationship. Now, the foundation that is built upon ultimately rests usually to some extent underneath, you know, the surface, okay? And that's where it gets more tricky. So, for example, I know some couples who like to go camping, okay? I am never going camping. It's never going to happen, okay? Because it's just never going to happen. I know some couples who like to go running together, okay? I'm never going jogging or running. It's just not going to happen. Okay, I'll do other things, walking, but it's never going to happen. Now, simple things like that might seem simple, but for some environments, one thing is actually quite pivotal. So having a shared sense or a sufficient sense with no great clashes of, you know, vision. What is your vision for this relationship? Working relationship, partnership, whatever it is. What is their mission and purpose and what have you? And do the two sufficiently align? So, you know, you might ask somebody, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? What's your vision for the future, if you'd be so kind as to share any of that you can with me. They also need to value the same or certainly similar things with no major clashes. You know, what's important to you? I remember hearing that word, you know, values earlier in life and laughing, thinking values, schmalues, that sounds fluffy and wussy. Okay, then I realized it's not, the word doesn't matter, it's what is important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So in a job interview, for example, I'll say to people, you know, so what's important to you in your work? And boy, do you get some good answers, because they'll tell you, you know, and I've had people say, well, I want a nice desk and I want a nice environment and that's about it. In other words, I'm here for me and I'm here for comfort. And actually, that's what's important. Other people want all sorts of other things. And the question is, what is important to you and how does that align with this partnership, this relationship? And then, you know, I would chuck in, you know, cultural factors. I know somebody who recently left a big company, and they were jolly glad in some ways to leave that big company. It did not really work for them. They were much happier in a smaller environment with much more flexibility and various things. And, you know, that may be the case, but people don't often know what's the best environment for them. And so it's important to just sort of check, is this going to be a good fit? I know some people who work in the non-profits, who used to work in the for-profits, and it drives them nuts. And I know some people who've gone from non-profit to for-profit and can't stand it. Absolutely can't stand it. So working out what kind of culture and environment would be my kind of environment, not easy, but we've got to try to get a good match. Some people want to live in the countryside. Some people want to live in New York City. Big differences, and they need to be sufficiently matched up there. Again, from the workplace, some people value money more than they do people and relationships. They want to earn money, and that's what the primary motivator. If we don't know that, we could actually make a poor choice. Some people are just more interested in themselves and their own agendas than anyone else's or any organization's mission. And we need to be aware of that. Some people want to get great status. They want an audience. I remember once we had a guy in training, and he wanted to have an audience. And we said, okay, we're not here for an audience. We're here to actually provide useful education, and that's really what it's about. Another chap was working like 72 hours a week, and in fact was a tyrant behind the scenes. So do you see, what's that about? He's not really there for the mission. He's there because he enjoys the power and the status. It's just not actually a good match. So I'll get you to interrupt me, but let's dive in, shall we, to the 4 known killers of relationships. Are there any comments at this point?
No, it's great.
No, this is fine. Keep going, Nigel.
Good. So there are things in the marriage and relationship research, that they have discovered, and I'll come on to those, that are frankly, relatively, individually, but especially together, absolutely lethal to committed relationships. They are literally death to a marriage, death to a committed relationship. And these principles apply as much in the workplace as they do to any other kinds of romantic relationships. So let me just give you some background. The gentleman that came across these insights, his name is John Gottman, Gottman, and he literally spent a great deal of time scientifically studying couples. He's one of the most famous researchers in the world for doing this, highly respected. And he'd just watch, and then he'd note down the patterns that he was seeing. And these were what he called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, meaning that if these things are going on in your relationship, working or romantic relationship, good luck, because you're in for trouble, and it may well be the death of that relationship. That's why I call them the serial killers of relationships. So one of these characteristics is what we call defensiveness. Now, defensiveness tends to occur, we get very defensive about what we've done or haven't done when we're not really very good at taking responsibility. So, I do nothing wrong and I don't need to listen to you. If I've done something and you're not happy with it, well, I can explain it to you. And they sort of go on and on explaining and justifying, and they won't actually begin to consider that maybe they might need to listen to something or somebody else. And that has been found basically to be very lethal to happiness and collaboration in a relationship. Now, this is not all depressing, by the way. I'm going to give you the antidotes to these in a moment. Another one is called stonewalling. Now, especially when people get upset or there's a difficult issue on the table. People go into fight, flight, freeze mode, and they get all upset. And stonewalling, shutting down, not being able to talk about it, is probably going to cause trouble, isn't it? If you can't have a proper conversation, the two of you, trouble is ahead. So we all talk about, communication, it's very important. If people are shutting down and not being willing to talk to people. Now, this comes out in many, many forms. The principle here, as it says, is, if I avoid it, it will go away or it will disappear. But we've seen, especially in some of our younger employees, sadly, people being willing to basically cold shoulder their boss and ignore them if they get a huff or they've been challenged about something, literally ignoring their boss. Which is just, to me, absolutely laughable. How on earth can you sit there and refuse to speak to your boss? But it happens. And it's a form of stonewalling, which is lethal to working or romantic relationships. So one or both of those is going to be trouble. And all I'm saying is if we're more aware of these things and more alert to these things, we really need to watch out if we're seeing this kind of behavior, because it's not going to help anybody. It's actually going to cause a lot of trouble. Now, there's 2 more, One of them is technically called, and we'll come on to the definition in a moment, criticism. So let's say there's a little bump in the road with me or Carol, and one of us says to the other, I can't believe you're the kind of person who would have done this, If you notice, that's going pretty deep, isn't it? You know, what kind of person are you, Nigel? Or what kind of person are you, Carol? That's called a criticism. And what it means is we're criticizing the character and the integrity or the whatever of the person that we're dealing with. And it hurts. It goes deep, sometimes too deep. And so criticism, you've heard of, the henpecked spouse, the henpecked husband, whatever it is. Those folks and those relationships are fragile because they're feeling got at on a deeply personal level. And it's really quite insidious, and it eats away at time. And eventually people say, right, I'm done here. Can't deal with this anymore. My critical boss, my bullying boss, whatever it is. Now, criticism can eventually morph, if it's not there to begin with, into what we call contempt. Okay. Now, contempt is like the ultimate insult. If I look at you, Marcia, because you've said or done something, and I do this, I go, oh, honestly. Okay. Or I look at you and I go, seriously? Seriously? Okay. What that means is I have no respect for this person. Okay. Those are literally the flashcards of I have no respect for this person in this relationship. And what this guy Gottman found is that marriages or relationships, committed relationships where this was going on, were literally, when he tracked them long term, absolutely doomed. And he basically could predict with 90% certainty whether or not a couple were going to make it. And one of the things he was looking for was things like contempt. So let's give an example. Okay, there was a couple, and the lady, I think, had a dog before this couple got together, and the guy was kind of driven a bit nuts by the behavior of this dog. Okay, it wasn't very well behaved. And Gottman, right, he turned the sound down on the video of this couple, and in the end, he could watch as little as 3 minutes of video. And he said, I don't even need to know what the issue is. But what do you think was happening? When they talked about this difficult subject of the dog, okay, the guy would go, oh, for goodness sake, you and this dog, and it's not okay. And then she'd get frustrated with him, and she'd go, oh, you're so difficult to live with, you're so intolerant, da, 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 da. Okay, and Gottman said, okay, these guys are not going to make it, period.
Yeah.
Why are they not going to make it? Because mutual respect is not there.
Absolutely.
She's not willing to listen. Maybe he's not willing to listen, but somewhere in there, respect has broken down. And he basically found that contempt, worse even than criticism, is lethal. It's literally poison, and this relationship cannot stand.
It's really interesting because as you're talking, I'm thinking that these 4 areas fall into either passive-aggressive behaviours or full-blown aggressive behaviours. And what you want to be is assertive, which is what you were just saying about, the mutual interest, mutual respect bit.
Yes.
There was no mutual respect. So the first 2 definitely are passive-aggressive behaviours. And then the criticism without being constructive and the contempt are oppressive behaviours. So they fall into aggression, don't they? Aggression, really interesting. Loving.
Definitely. So then let's add this in, okay? Because you know as well as I do, nothing's ever entirely straightforward, okay? So what can happen is someone who gets criticized and criticized and criticized unfairly will inevitably become defensive because they're being unfairly and harshly got at. So yes, sometimes defensiveness is a form of passive aggression, but sometimes it's a defense because they're trying to defend themselves against harsh or unfair criticism. So do you see, one thing can actually lead, as this little diagram shows here, to other things emerging because of this negative toxic behavior. So it's very difficult. Are you going to go and talk to your boss if your boss doesn't listen and isn't interested? Well, no, you're going to stonewall, because what choice do you have? Where does it get you? If your boss is actually going to punish you for showing initiative or speaking up about what needs to be discussed. So any one of these things needs to be spotted and nipped in the bud fairly quickly, because otherwise it's going to cause trouble.
That's a poison, isn't it, really?
Yes.
It is a poison, and
the
snake is quite a good picture for that, absolutely. And one does flow into the other. I mean, I'm nodding here because I've experienced it with staff and in situations around the country when I've been at work. And yeah, you see it all the time, only you don't always give it the headings. But you see one rolling into the other, and you just know that's the end. But the contempt sits in, and then there's no coming back from it.
Definitely. And again, these things come out in different ways. Give an example. We had a gentleman who had a staff member who was, there were issues with this staff member. And do you know what they did? They looked at the boss and they just rolled their eyes as if to say, you're an idiot. And in that moment, you know what he did? He snapped and he said, "You're fired." Okay. Now, as you know, for the HR world, if you don't follow due process,
Yeah.
you can get into difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
And now he said to me, when I taught him this, he said, "Now I look back and I realize what it was. It was that disrespect that fired me up, and I wanted to fire them there and then. But that was lethal for him, not just the employee, because it caused, more trouble." And that's the difficulty with these toxic behaviors. They will literally inflame other people. And some people are very manipulative. They'll actually say, "You're bullying me." If you become provoked, or you lose patience in the end with this kind of behavior. So it's very insidious. And some people don't even know they're doing it. So this can be the death of relationships, and it can be lethal in the workplace too. So the good news is, sorry.
Yeah. No, to accuse a line manager, or which happened to one of my line managers, was accused of being a bully. Mm-hmm. It was because they couldn't, the person wasn't being a bully when we got to the end of it, but because they were just explaining what should be done as opposed to what the person was doing.
Yes.
And that was deemed as being picked on and bullying. Yep. And
absolutely, yeah.
Not tolerating the situation. But we did get to the end of one of situations. But yeah, that's where it goes.
So now the good news is, there are antidotes to these things, and sometimes we can work with someone, try to engage in some coaching and some support to help people understand, you may not realize you're doing this, but let's show you a way to not have to be quite so difficult to deal with. So defensiveness, ensure and enable that the team are able to take responsibility, the team members, for things that go wrong, for things that don't go okay, or what have you, model that behavior. I'm so sorry I let you guys down. I'm just going to take ownership. It's very interesting. When you take ownership, everything's easier. People go, yeah, okay, stuff happens, no big deal. Okay, but if you don't, trouble is brewing, because people get a bit sick and tired of dealing with someone who's never wrong, never fails, never drops the ball, and that can be a problem. So, trying to coach your folks to just say, so what didn't you do well this week? Let's look at that, shall we? And just accept that that's life. We can't be great all the time, and so forth. Stonewalling, especially when people are upset. So there's a thing called self-soothing. Okay, and this is really where we just, learn to take a breath. Like I was dealing with a very upset person this week, and I just said to them, okay, just pause for a second, just take a breath. Take a breath, literally. Okay, when we go back into our adult selves, we realize nothing's ever really the end of the world. Okay, but when people are very upset, they shut down, they close off, and that doesn't go anywhere. So learning to just calm down a little bit and then just express things nicely and professionally. I was very disappointed this week when I came in and you weren't here on time and all that sort of stuff. Instead of just stonewalling and saying nothing, or them saying nothing, or both of you saying nothing, doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, I mean, Burns, the parent-adult-child model of communication, this is what this is talking about, because we revert back, don't we, to some of those, rather than working in adult-to-adult conversations and behaviours, we revert into maybe childlike or parent-like. So we become, the teller, the finger pointer, or the person crying or having tantrums, rather than staying in that assertive category and having adult-to-adult conversations. Really, this is really fascinating stuff. Really. Well,
definitely, because when you're anxious as the boss, you will become the parent. Yeah. And the trouble is when you act like a parent and patronize to some degree.
Wagging your finger, absolutely. You will do it my way, and my way or the highway.
Yeah. Very much, very much. The criticism, okay, there's a difference, a very important difference, very useful for all of us really in our relationships, between complaining and criticizing. Yeah. So for example, if somebody brings some boxes to my office, okay, if they put them just inside the door and I trip over them, okay, I might say, would you mind, in future popping the boxes to the side so people don't trip over them? Okay. Now, obviously, hopefully, if the person's able to listen and remember these things, we'll get through it and we'll make it better. Okay. The problem comes, of course, if they don't listen to feedback and if they're not receptive, in which case, after you've asked them 25 times, please don't put the boxes there, eventually you're probably going to want to get critical and say, I don't understand how you can't remember this incredibly simple request. So this is where, things have to be sort of weighed out. So there's a few people who practice what we call feed forward. You know, instead of saying I was very disappointed that you said, you know, you did this the other day, we say, you know, if you don't mind, it really would be helpful to pop these boxes over here instead of here because of this reason. You know, and that's non-critical. It's simply saying in future, could we do this a little differently? And sort of giving a polite hint, which is far less harsh or, you know, personal and so forth. And then contempt, you know, how do you overcome a culture of contempt? Well, we need to breed culture of appreciation. You know, Carol, I really appreciate what you said to me the other day. You know, Marcia, that thing you did the other day really meant a lot. You know, it's very helpful. I want to let you know that. Instead of allowing, you know, frustration with folks to creep in. I mean, I can think of one or two individuals in our organization I probably do actually have contempt for, perhaps for good reason, okay, justifiably, okay, but nonetheless, in a professional workplace, and even frankly in a non, you know, work relationship, it's very important that we restrain that and we try to remain civilized and, as you said, adult in how we relate to each other as much as humanly possible. Because even if we have to exit gracefully from these relationships, you know, we want to remain civilized and kind and respectful, even if people are impossibly difficult to deal with. So there are antidotes. It's very important that we remember that. Otherwise, we can start to get a bit depressed.
I think you just got to, you know, work with people. And if you're in a managerial role, where you're especially working with a lot of teams of people, you've got to be asking them what their views are and what they think, and you know, sharing that, you know, that round table approach, you know, where you're just sharing ideas, and making them feel part of it. You know, making them feel worthwhile. And they asked me a question. Carol asked me what I thought, and made a note. And I wonder if she'll use the idea. You know, and thank them if it comes out, if it works. You know, I'll give them, you know, to your line manager, give them some praise or whichever simple way that you do it. But try and work with them that way.
Just to circle back, okay, let me give you an example of a couple of my colleagues here, okay. I have a couple of colleagues who would never dream of getting particularly defensive about anything, okay. They would never dream of stonewalling their boss or anybody else, you know, not unless there was, you know, adequate reason to not talk about something for good reason. They certainly would never be critical of anybody. They would just say, well, you know, we need to be understanding and we need to address things. And they would never dream of showing contempt. So can you see that when we hire people with good, solid, rounded characters, we're likely to never have to really deal with this stuff because they're good, solid folks to work with and to partner with. All right, let's talk then about the difficult issue of relationships that are not going well or haven't gone well or have never gone well, okay? Because sometimes we just have to get a little bit real about this stuff and accept that sometimes it's not necessarily the end of the world if a working relationship or other relationship needs to come to some kind of an end. So I've called it here, you know, the super skill of knowing when to move on. By the way, there's a wonderful book by a guy called Dr. Henry Cloud. Dr. Henry Cloud, and he wrote a book called Necessary Endings, to where I stole the title from. And it's all about the relationships and the partnerships that we frankly need to gracefully move on from because they're too much hassle, they're not really working for them or for us, and somebody needs to cut the cord. Okay, now going back to our metaphor for the romantic relationships, you know, divorce or breakup sometimes happen for good or at least good enough reasons. Okay, it's a very difficult topic, understand the ramifications, but keep in mind, as that guy said, the cost of being long-suffering with an incapable or misplaced employee or partner is far greater than the discomfort of having a tough evaluation and a speedy termination. Now, to some people that seems harsh. Okay, we got to give people a chance, we got to this and the other. Okay, but to sometimes we've given it a chance. They either don't want to do it, they can't do it, or both. And we need to say, okay, I need to get real here. You know, it would be far better for you, at least in our opinion, to have you either doing something else, working somewhere else, maybe within our organization, or maybe outside of it.
This is a good old cost-benefit analysis, isn't it?
It is.
Very simply put.
Very true. You know, our happiness in terms of relationships in general, but also our futures, you know, really depend on us and our ability to make sure we're producing good caliber work and building good relationships. Now, obviously, we're still going to be realistic. Do you mean I'm still human? You're still human. None of us are perfect. None of us are, you know, flawless or problem-free or difficulty-free. But again, is it productive enough good enough to be able to continue, or do we actually sometimes need to just get real and say, you know what, it'd actually be more productive for everybody to just leave it there and move on. It's a very tough call. So then in closing, you know, the courage to bid folks for her. Well, another little quote for you here, you know, sometimes it's not who you hire, but who you fail to fire. That most likely or most silently is shaping your success. If you talk to business owners, you know, sometimes they'll say, yeah, you know, I really wish we tackled this sooner for the good of everybody, because we just sort of dragged on and on with this awkward relationship and stuff, and it just really wasn't productive. Almost feel like we've lost a lot of time and energy on something that wasn't really working for both parties. So what have we said today? In true, it seems to be true in committed and marital and other committed relationships and organizations, that yes, we can work on what's lacking sometimes, and you know, see what we can do to remedy things or get things on track, but we've also got to be realistic. We've also got to be somewhat clear and decisive. I've seen situations where, you know, people have been long suffering with each other for too long, sometimes even too many years. We needed to just pull the plug and get over it, because you know, it's just not worth it. You know, we could have done better individually or elsewhere. Sometimes it was just a poor fit. You know, if you put me on the reception desk downstairs, okay, I could do the job. For a week or two, I'd be Mr. Bubbly, Mr. Enthusiastic. Give me a month or two and I'll want to jump off the top of the building, because it's just not a good fit.
Yeah.
Not a good fit for them, not a good fit for me. It's just not a good fit. And we don't have to think, oh, I'm no good, or they're no good. We just need to accept this isn't a very good match. So weak hiring of both kinds, you know, relationship-wise or working relationship-wise, is going to cause a price. And it's never going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes. People are going to make mistakes, but we've got to have the courage to face these issues and where necessary, move on. I'll give you an example. I worked with a gentleman many years ago, and he was basically asked, despite his good capabilities by his leadership team, if he wouldn't mind moving on, because the things that they were facing ahead were not really going to be, you know, fitting to his strong suit. And that was a tough conversation. I was able to help him through that. But actually it was wonderful, because he said, you know what, you're right. I'm not very good at that particular stuff that you're going to need. I'd actually be perfectly happy to move on. And we helped him move on.
Wow.
And he was much happier elsewhere, because he could accept that actually the fit was no longer there.
Yeah.
That has to be handled extremely delicately, doesn't it? So they, you know, you still have your sense of worth as you're leaving that post.
That's right. There's another issue I've identified lately called our codependency. Now, codependency is a complex term, but basically, if we're more committed to our team member than they are to the job and to succeeding, then frankly, that's on us. Do you mean we're trying to make it work when it ain't never going to work, because they're not really that bothered? And we need to get real and stop, you know, taking responsibility for other people's troubles or difficulties. And that's a test on our side. And again, you know, sometimes there's a better fit elsewhere for some people. I remember dealing with a lady once, and she'd basically gotten let go, and I was able to counsel her as to how to deal with that. And I talked to her like 6 months later, and she said, you know, I'm actually so much happier out of that particular culture that I was in. And so do you see, sometimes we're so afraid, oh my goodness, this poor person, they're going to have to get another job and stuff. I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, talk to them 6 months later, it was for the best. We just needed to face the fact that it wasn't actually, you know, easy to face. Some folks won't fit in anywhere, or it will be a bit bumpy wherever they go. Okay, but we're not responsible for that. It's up to them to navigate those relationships, and no good us trying to take responsibility, because the price can be just too high for us and our organization. So pretty much what I think you were going back to, Carol, earlier, you know, which is that we're probably wise when it comes to choosing and building relationships and sustaining relationships to hire and commit a little bit more slowly.
Absolutely.
You know, some of the best folks would say, you know, fire quickly as appropriate and with due diligence and stuff. But, you know, do your due diligence when it comes to hiring. You know, get to know this person, maybe multiple occasions, because people can be good the first time. But if you talk to them 3 or 4 times afterwards, you'll start to get the real them as time goes on. So, you know, and also letting people, you know, prove their trustworthiness. Don't assume we can trust people. Don't assume they can do the job. Check as much as possible. And what would be the result of applying some of these principles in our organizations and even in our lives outside of organizations would be greater security, stability, and better results for everybody involved. Because what we're looking for in life is win-win relationships. Good for you, good for me. We can do things together that we could never have done on our own.
Absolutely. That's when a good appraisal comes into full, you know, when you're appraising people during their employment as well.
Yes.
And again, that's another two-way interview, isn't it?
Yeah,
where people
it really is.
Get a chance then to talk to you and ask you about, your role with them or whatever.
Yes.
I always find a good old appraisal works really well.
Definitely.
Mm.
Definitely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Really good stuff. Really good stuff.
Wow, wow.
So why don't we wrap up then? Maybe if I ask you guys. So Marcia, what has been the most salient point for you in this material?
One of the things that comes out for me is around power and how people can misuse or embrace personal power.
Yes.
And if we're talking, one of the things you alluded to when we were talking was about leadership. And, we get power that comes to us in the title of our job, but we also get power that comes to us in terms of the character that we hold. And surely that's the best use of our power, to use the personal power, the referent power, if you like, rather than the authoritative power that comes with our title. That links into also the issues around self-respect.
That's right.
That you've talked about, and how we connect with people and how we create boundaries. So all that stuff is intrinsically linked into what you've discussed there, really, which is, it's made me think, well, I've got a book on the use of power. I'm going to maybe pick that up again and have a look at some of the elements in it, because it's really got me fired up, this one. It's really good presentation. Thank you.
And it links in, of course, with collaborative models of leadership, which are all the thing today, especially for the younger generations. If you study Gen Y, Gen Z, they want to be in dialogue. They want to offer anything they can offer. And without that involvement, people literally move on. They just go, okay, no one's listening, right, moving on. So we've got to model that. Yeah,
there's a certain level of management, isn't there, even out there today, that, that don't want to hear what other people have got to say. And they just think the plan is theirs. And theirs to be executed, and everybody else has got to work along with them.
That's right.
But if you listen to people who've got some brilliant ideas, I think I've always been the sort of person that goes, really? Oh, I didn't think of that. Because that's the way I am. And but I think that makes me sound a bit perfect. I'm not. But I'm always happy. If somebody comes up with something else, and I go, I can sit on that for a minute or two. I haven't even thought about where does that fit in. And I think that's fabulous, because people do think differently, and they've got their own self-respect that you have to keep massaging as well. But equally recognize that these people, they might be 20 years younger than you, but they've got the brain, they've got the ideas, they've got the passion. So that was quite, there's a few areas. And of course, I'm sitting here thinking about my past and all the teams and the models that I've worked with and the teams that I've worked with, and the scary things that have happened there. And I can't remember half the time how we got out of it, but we did. But that's it's taken me back, thinking from how things have changed a lot in my life, and how Marcia and I worked together. We've got a lot of respect for each other, and I think that helps heaps along with all the work that we do. And inclusion, I just think that word inclusion is everything.
Very much. Treating people as equals, I think that's a big thing today. Is to say, good, old, young, whatever our life stages, backgrounds, etc., be treated with dignity at the table and have a voice at the table.
Totally agree. And I still have ex-colleagues who I see and speak to even now, and I know that's not the game they're playing. They've got to a stage now where they're an age where they are empowered for this role, and by golly, do people know about that? And it's wrong. It exasperates me, really, because it's unnecessary. And that's when people stop working for you and with you.
Definitely.
They're not working to you, they're working alongside of you. And yes, you're the one being paid the salary to lead, and advise and help and support, but get behind them, open your arms and push a bit, give them an opportunity.
Definitely
I
terrific.
think inclusion's the most marvellous word.
Definitely.
I've enjoyed that today, though. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, it's really,
Thoroughly
really
enjoyed
good.
that.
Really been
Good. That's the goal.
Thank you.
One of the other topics that has come up, Nigel, has been about trauma. And I know that's one of your other speciality areas. So I am going to be very cheeky and ask you to come back again and do something around trauma, because the group asked about stuff like that.
Yes, definitely. It's a profound subject, so that would be one worth covering, especially for the workplace. You know, how on earth is trauma connected to the workplace? You'd be surprised.
And particularly in this day and age and this era where we're, you know, just coming out of lockdown, the trauma is very, very, very real for a lot of people.
Definitely a big subject,
So that'll be fantastic. Nigel, thank you once again for being here, and we'll be in touch very soon to book you again.
Sounds good.
For our private sessions, Carol?
Well, yes, please.
I'm really enjoying this now and all this learning and all that I'm getting.
Well, Nigel, I've really enjoyed that. I did. It was great, and
good stuff.
It makes you think, doesn't it? It really gets the cogs going, and but it's all around inclusion, respect, you know, for one another, isn't it? That's at the end of the day.